Today I want to talk about DLC 4 for Cold War Zombies because this is something that is very unique this time around because we have very little information on DLC 4. We have literally no major hints to what's going to be going on inside this final map, which is incredibly rare because if you think about like every other DLC before this, at least you get one major hint to what's going to be going on. I mean, think about the ending of Firebase Z. They literally mentioned the Ural Mountains and the ending of the second Outbreak main Easter egg. We have the strike team captured, right? And we know that's definitely going to play a part in the next one. But this time around, our best hint is probably the director, but by the fact that we don't really know anything about the director, it's not really a good hint to what could be possibly be going on in DLC 4. And because of all this, I want to take this time to kind of go over a couple characters that I think could possibly play a major role inside DLC 4, whether they may be good or bad or anything like that. Now, I'm not going to be mentioning obvious characters, like I'm sure Samantha's going to play a role, but I just don't really know what. I mean, her powers are growing, that's all we really know. I mean, the only suspicion that we have besides that about her is that there's a possibility that she could maybe die here, but again, that's super speculative and that's not something I want to really go in on today because that's something that you've probably heard before. So instead, I want to focus on 3 characters. One less than the other 2, but those characters being the director, because obviously, but then there's Zykov, and finally Ravenov. I think those 3 characters possibly could be very important characters for this final map, and maybe not for the reasons that you may be thinking, especially for one of them that we'll be saving forward for the end. And trust me, you're going to want to stick around for him because he's interesting to say the very least. But first, let's talk about the director, the most obvious one. And I don't want to spend too much time talking about him because I have an entire 20-minute video talking about him and I don't want to repeat a lot of what I said. But the only things that I think are important mentioning is that the director seems to know way too much that he should know. He's known about the Forsaken before anybody else, including Omega. In fact, the only reason Omega knows about him is because somebody leaked the information that the director knew about the Forsaken to Omega. And it was a pretty believable leak because, you know, they started making the inversion warheads and all that to stop the Forsaken, so we do know that he's known about the Forsaken before anybody else. And I'm sure you guys know about all the other things he did, that for some reason he predicted everything we were going to need inside of Mauer Toten. If you guys don't know this, then the quick TLDR is that he set up everything. He's the one who sent the inversion warhead, or I guess the parts to build the inversion warhead, the uranium, the bomb, even sending the wonder weapon itself. He sent everything over there for us to be successful at what we're doing. Not to even mention that he sent Klaus over there, and then he also used Klaus to clean up or silence people that I'm sure you guys are familiar with. So he kind of knew a lot of things and knew exactly what he had to do, and that just makes him incredibly suspicious, right? And that's not even mentioning Project Janus, which Project Janus, or however you want to pronounce it, is something we know very little about. The only thing that we could really relate to it is that it's called Janus, and Janus is a Roman god, and the whole thing about transitions and stuff like that, which makes it sound like something big is going to happen with it, but we really don't know much. The only major thing we know about Janus is that anybody who learns about it that isn't supposed to is dead, and that Samantha seems to be a problem or a roadblock on the way to completing Project Janus that we of course saw in the ending cutscene. And because of all that, I'm sure Project Janus is going to play a humongous role in it. Now, I don't believe that Project Janus is going to have anything favorable to the Forsaken, because why the heck would the director stop the Forsaken and set up everything that we needed to stop the Forsaken in Mauer Toten just to help him in the end? That makes no sense at all to me. And because of that, I think that there's something more nefarious here, and this may have something to do with something more than just the Forsaken being in the dark ether, which is something that has been hinted at for a while. There may be some other not so nice force hiding in there that we have yet to learn of, or yet to realize it is a not good force, which brings us to Zykov. Yes, why are we talking about Zykov? Well, he's someone that I have been suspicious of for a little bit now, because he's just interesting to say the very least, because Zykov, as you guys know, is the guy who has been talking to us from the Dark Ether ever since the Machina. He originally started sending us the documents, and that was when he would mark day, and then he would explain what happened that day, or any relevant things that he had learned up to that point. And then from there, in Firebase C, we actually hear directly from him. He starts talking to us, letting us know a bunch of good stuff about the Dark Ether. But then in Outbreak, he continues to talk to us, but then he's also talking to Peck, which is interesting because he never lets us know, until this day doesn't let us know that he's also talking to Peck. Now, make of that what you will, but it is something that is there. One thing I should also mention is that he's also taught Peck how to build the inversion warheads. And for him to know how to build the inversion warheads is interesting, because the only other person that we know knows how to build the inversion warheads is the director, which is interesting on its own, because why did either of those people know how to build those things? Like, what's going on there? But regardless, we do have to point out that for some reason he knows a lot more than you should, because his explanation for knowing how to do any of this stuff is that he's been in the Dark Ether a long time. But last I checked, the Dark Ether doesn't really make you learn how to do, things like building inversion warheads, but I don't know. Either way, that's not something I want to go too much into depth here. Another thing that I will mention, much like the director, I do not think he is working with the Forsaken. In fact, I think he's in direct conflict with him, because he's the one who taught Peck how to build the inversion warheads in order to stop the Forsaken. So again, someone that I don't think he's working with Forsaken, but it is quite suspicious of what he's doing. The other thing I find suspicious about Zykov is his whole, I want to go home, please help me get home and stuff like that, which, again, at face value doesn't sound too crazy. Like, you're trapped in Dark Ether, anybody wants to go home. I mean, look what happened to Samantha, right? Obviously, but it's kind of suspicious to me for two main reasons. One is that he changed his reason for why he wanted to go home so bad. Originally, he just wanted to go home because he's been trapped there forever. I mean, that makes sense, that's fine. But then, now more recently, he's telling us that he wants to go home in order to help us fight the Forsaken, which is fine and all, but it's just weird that he changed his reason for that. And I'm not saying that this is directly related to the Forsaken, but we do know that the Forsaken has taken different forms in order to manipulate people. Of course, I doubt he is the Forsaken, don't get me wrong here, because why the heck would the Forsaken help us stop the Forsaken? That literally doesn't make any sense at all, at least currently, so I'm not saying that, but it is interesting because we did see the Forsaken did take the form of Vogel, someone who was trapped in the Dark Ether around the same time or slightly before that Zykov was trapped in there. I mean, it's just things that I want to point out. But the final thing about Zykov that I want to mention that I think is something that should raise suspicion about is how the heck is he still alive? I mean, we all saw what happened in Firebase Z when Samantha was trapped in the Dark Ether. I mean, Samantha was trapped in the Dark Ether just for a couple days in the regular universe, but when she returns, she's been trapped in there for at least months, maybe years, which would mean that time passes faster in the Dark Ether, which doesn't make any sense for Zykov, because Zykov was trapped in the Dark Ether back in the 40s, and this story is currently taking place in the 80s, which that's been forever, right? So why hasn't time passed incredibly fast for him? Why hasn't he already aged away and died? And not to mention, why is he someone that isn't affected and changed by the Dark Ether like so many other people that we hear about going into the Dark Ether happen to them? Some people turn to zombies, some people turn to mimics, some people just go crazy and die. There's just all these bad things happen to them, except for him and Samantha. Samantha, we have an explanation for why she doesn't get changed by the Dark Ether, but why him? Or maybe he was changed, I don't know. Either way, it's just things that are red flags when it comes to Zykov. I just think that he isn't all that he seems at this current point. Now, this doesn't mean he is a villain, but it is something that we have to be wary of. Someone who is not telling us everything and really doesn't work with what we know of the story, because as I mentioned, this man should be long dead, but for some reason isn't. And because of that, I want to keep an eye on him for the future going forward. And one thing I want to mention before we move on from Zykov is actually a radio we got in Toten, and this may be relevant to Zykov and maybe even the director, but I'll play just the important part of this radio, and then I'll kind of mention a little bit here and there, and then maybe we could tie it back to something.
The dark ether is a vast ocean. The Forsaken, just one white veil. There are other realms, other worlds. It is a universe, after all, not a singular place.
So in this radio, we hear Yeager, Dr. Yeager from the Omega Group, saying that the Forsaken is just one white whale in this universe, and also continues to say that the Dark Ether is not just a place, but an entire universe. So this place isn't a small contained place, but there's a lot of stuff, like there's an entire universe here, which meaning that there's a lot of possibility for a lot of different powerful beings to exist in. And I'm not saying that there's the Forsaken and then maybe there's some other being in there that may have relation to Zykov, or maybe have a situation like Vogel where he was taken over by the Forsaken, except this time it's not the Forsaken and there's some other being that took over Zykov. I'm not saying that, but I'm saying there's a possibility. That's all I'm leaving it at. But regardless, I think that we should probably wrap off Zykov and talk about the last character, because I think this is someone that people wouldn't really expect me to talk about when it comes to major characters going into DLC 4. And of course, this is Ravenov. So Ravenov is kind of interesting, and something that we should probably point out about him is that he was nowhere to be found in Toten, literally not even in the radio. That's not to say we didn't hear about him, because we actually did get a radio, but it was in Outbreak. And this radio was actually a conversation between Ravenov and Weaver. And I actually want to play that radio, or at least the important parts of this radio, for you guys to listen to.
I want a lot of things, most of which I'll never get. And I'm sure you can relate, especially now that you're a marked man, an enemy of the state. Several, actually. You helped my team walk into a trap.
I betrayed no one. Like Maxis, I was trying to do the right thing. I had no idea events would play out like they did.
See, that's your problem. You're not as smart as you think you are. Too much fire in your belly, too much ice in your heart, but not enough smarts. Not where it counts.
Are you any different? At least I am here, in the field, putting my ass and heart on the line.
Well, maybe you can redeem yourself, Ravenov. Maybe.
So in this radio, obviously we hear Weaver not being very happy with Ravenov. I mean, obviously after the events of the second Outbreak main Easter egg, which is when this radio takes place, I could imagine he's not pretty happy with him. I mean, just think about what just happened. He got his strike team kidnapped, right? Even though it doesn't seem like that's what he wanted to. Obviously, he was trying to save those scientists from, or help them at least, leave Omega to go to Requiem. But of course, it didn't turn out like that, and instead the strike team was captured and taken by Omega, which kind of turned out to be a good thing in the end, but at least at the time didn't seem too great. But then, of course, Weaver does go on to say at the end of that radio to Ravenov that maybe he can redeem himself, meaning that probably something's going to happen in DLC 4 with him, and he's probably going to play some, at least, role in order to redeem himself. But I'm not too sure about him redeeming himself. And the reason why I think that is because just think about everything Ravenov has done up until this point. It hasn't been good. I mean, if we think to the two Outbreak main Easter eggs, obviously we went over why the second Outbreak main Easter egg wasn't great, right? They were unable to help the Omega scientists escape, and then on top of that, the strike team was then captured out after that, so not really great from there. Then we go back before that, And then we have the first Outbreak main Easter egg, and this is of course where we go help Ravenov take these inversion warheads and shoot them into the middle of the ocean and them goodbye, which at the time didn't seem like a bad thing, seemed like we were doing the Lord's work, but then we later learned we were not doing the Lord's work at all, and in fact, we threw away the only countermeasures that anybody had in order to stop the Forsaken, which is like, what? That's not very good at all. And maybe, Ravenov was just ignorant of this like we were, but it is something to keep an eye on. But if it was just those two, I mean, it's fine, whatever. He made 2 mistakes, whatever. But even in Firebase Z, everything he does just doesn't turn out well for the good guys. I mean, just think about Firebase Z. It seems like it's a success at first, but if you really think about what the heck is going on there, I mean, he called Samantha over there before we went there, and when she went there, she was captured by Omega and then thrown in the dark ether. And from there, Samantha has her terrible experience and also has her powers reawaken in her, then causing the outbreak at Firebase Z. Of course, again, something that isn't great, right? We don't really think it's a good thing to have Samantha's powers reawaken, or we don't think it's good to cause outbreaks. Yet he's the one who called Samantha over there for this. And to me, this just seems a little too suspicious that every single major thing Ravenov has done up until this point has not been good. Firebase Z, Outbreak 1 and 2, every major thing he's been involved with has turned out negative. And to me, I cannot overlook this. And because of this, I think that Ravenov is someone we should be suspicious of. Again, this isn't to say that 100% this guy's working with the Forsaken, but at the same time, it's just something to be suspicious of. Him and Zykov are the two that there's something fishy there. There's something weird going on with those two characters, but I'm just not sure if it's just them being incredibly unlucky or just kind of dumb in how they carry out themselves, or if there's actually something more to those two characters. And because of that, I think that the 3 main characters, obviously including the director, are going to be ones to look out for, but the ones you should keep a side eye on at all times is going to be Zykov and Ravenov. These two just, to me, seems like there's just something more there about them, and I honestly don't trust either of them. But regardless, this video has already gone on for way too long at this point, but I'd love to hear what you guys think about my thoughts on DLC 4. Do you actually think these 3 characters are going to play a major role in this? I mean, I could probably guarantee you that they're all 3 going to play a role, but do you think they're going to play a major role? And then from that, do you think that all of them are going to be villains, some of them good guys, some of them bad guys? I feel like that's probably going to be the mixture. The one we expect the least to be a good guy is going to be the good guy. The one we expect the least to be the bad guy is going to be the bad guy, and stuff like that. I feel like something weird like that's going to happen here, but I'm sure we're going to find out as time goes on. When Season 5 comes around, we'll get more intel that we'll probably learn more about, and that'll be incredibly helpful. But for now, they're just characters that I thought you should keep an eye on going into DLC 4 whenever that comes around. But regardless, that's about it for me. If you guys did find this video entertaining in any way, shape, and form, definitely do all the normal YouTube stuff, like, subscribe, bell, share, and all that great stuff. But I'm going to go, and I'll catch you guys in the next stream, video, whatever that may be, and laters, guys.